When we go through things, we can become better or we can become bitter.
Beyond bitterness is a blessing. So always on the other side of bitterness is a blessing. And how many people miss the blessing because they hold on to the bitterness? Bitterness is a really ugly thing, and you think it's hidden and down tight inside you, but you find out that bitterness grows.
We had a hurricane last year, and one day Kim and I were sitting in the kitchen, and I noticed the ceiling was dripping water. Ceiling was dripping water. I mean, it was dripping, turned brown. So I called the roofers over and the ceiling people over rather, and they came, and before they could do anything, the ceiling started talking to me. The ceiling said, "Mac, I'm mad with you." I said, "Why are you mad with me?" The ceiling said, "Because you are accusing me of something that really ain't my fault." I said, "What you mean? You dripping all this water down on my hardwood floor? You dripping all this water all on my kitchen table in the nook?" He said, "That's the problem. You keep blaming me for this. I'm not the thing that's broken. It's the roof." I said, "Well, if it's the roof, how come you're the one that's dripping?" He said, "Because when something is broken, it leaks down on whatever is close to it." You've got to deal with bitterness, because bitterness is a broken roof leaking on a ceiling. And I came tonight to help somebody get delivered. You've got to relinquish bitterness, because when you relinquish bitterness, you give an open invitation for the Holy Spirit to give you peace and joy.
Bitterness is a really ugly thing, and you think it's hidden and down tight inside you, but you find out that bitterness grows. If you don't get rid of bitterness, it will grow and become a whole tree, and that's very dangerous. Bitterness is extremely ugly. It has a root and can bring a tree of troubles. So it's not just a little thing that works today.
And Naomi to me is an example of how you have to learn how to manage life with the hand you've been dealt. There have been 3 funerals. For Naomi, it involved her husband and her 2 sons. There were actually 2 daughters-in-law. There was Orpah, and then the one all of us know about, Ruth. And when Naomi leaves Moab to return home, she advises both of them to not follow her. One of them, the one that was Orpah, listened and went back home. After all, they were both young. They were young enough to start their life over. But Ruth looks at her and begins to speak those words that we oftentimes say at weddings. We say, "Entreat me not to leave thee, for where you lodge, I'll lodge. Your God will be my God." And Ruth decides to go back with her. And where our text takes up, they are at the edge of the town, and the people in the town recognize Naomi. They call her by her name, and she cuts them off and tells them, "Stop calling me that. Call me Mara." It's interesting to me, y'all, because this is the only instance in the Bible where a name change goes from good to bad. Every other name change goes from bad to good. Her name, Naomi, meant pleasant. It meant sweet. But Mara means bitter. She says, "Don't call me that, because the way my life has gone, my life has been anything but sweet. From now on, call me bitter." There are people in the church masquerading like things are well, when deep down inside they are being eaten alive with the spirit of bitterness. Bitterness is an inward condition. It will manifest itself in various ways: losing your temper, high blood pressure, irritability, sleeplessness, obsession with getting even, depression, isolation, pervasive pessimism. And when bitterness is not properly handled, it will not only impact you, but but it will impact everybody around you, because bitterness, when not dealt with, leads to brokenness, and when you are broken, you break everything around you.
So if you don't get rid of bitterness, it will grow and become a whole tree, and that's very dangerous. So when we look at a tree of bitterness, we think, oh, it starts with a little tiny thing right at the beginning that, oh, well, you know, it's not that bad. But when you nurse it and replay it, and everybody here has had problems with bitterness, and probably you're having some with it tonight. You know, it just seems like you get so much opportunity. And sometimes it can just be some little thing. It can be many times a vain imagination. And sometimes it can be something that we really feel we have earned a right to be bitter. But if you can see the blessings of getting on the other side of bitterness, you won't want to keep a little tiny bit of it. You won't want to nurse something that maybe your family has nursed for years, because it keeps you from the blessing of God. So what happens is, when you get bitter, you don't take God's grace into the situation. Can God give you the grace to forgive that person? Yes, He can. But we'd rather be bitter than take the grace. And so when we get bitter, we defile ourselves. But when we get bitter and hold on to bitterness, it not only defiles us, it defiles our children, our grandchildren. It really begins a generation curse. Now, grace works two ways. I love to experience God's grace. Oh, that's so wonderful. Because it's really God's supernatural ability to act on your behalf when you don't in any way deserve it. Do you like God's grace? I love God's grace, because that's really miracle working power that comes into your life from God's love for you. But then it's not only you receiving God's grace, but it's also you giving God's grace. Could you forgive someone that has really hurt you and damaged you and say, I'm just going to experience the grace of God to give away, not just to receive that He forgives me, but I'm going to experience grace to give. And so grace is something we receive, but also grace is something we give. And so we fall short of grace. We don't get that miracle working power we need to have to come to us or through us when we hold on to bitterness.
Don't stay stuck because of what you don't know. When we're introduced to Naomi, watch this, we are introduced to her after her husband and sons have died. Her two sons have died. Husband has died. And the Bible never says, Freddie, why they died. We don't know why they died. We have no answers. All we know is they died. The reality of life is that we must often live with unanswered questions. See, sometimes faith is trusting God's answer while living in the tension of ambiguity. Faith is, I'm trusting you even though I don't even understand what you up to. I'm trusting you even though I don't have an answer for why you allowed me to go through what I'm going through. Naomi has no answers. She's getting no revelation. Here's the problem. Our discomfort with ambiguity always pushes us to find answers. Because we think we can't be at peace until we have answers. And bitterness always analyzes when it can't find answers. She said, God did this to me. God put me in this predicament. God, please get that. Bitter always seeks blame. Bitter always seeks who they can blame to make him or herself feel better. And Naomi had the nerve to go straight to the top. Since I don't have an answer for this, God, you did this to me. She's stuck with wives. Anybody in here got some wives? Why did my child get on drugs? And you're bitter with God. Why did my husband say he don't want me no more? and you're bitter. Why did my friend who I trusted with information tell it to everybody? Jesus. Why did they fire me when I'd been loyal for 15 years? Why, when I never smoked, did they find a mass on my lungs? And now you're bitter. But here's the thing, God never gives her an answer, because God gives you what you need, not what you prefer. If you needed the answers, you would have gotten them in order for God to move you forward. So if God doesn't give you answers, that means he'll give you what you need to keep going in spite of what you've been going through. Don't you let your curiosity get in the way of your convictions. Don't you let the ambiguity get in the way of your faith. There are a whole lot of things I don't have answers to. I have a lot of unanswered whys, but what I do know is that God is still God. God is still faithful, and God will keep me in perfect peace. That's his promise. Stop giving attention to how God's gonna do it and just believe that God's gonna do it. I mean, after all, there's some things you trust you don't have all the answers to. Think of how many things around you work perfectly. You don't have no idea how they work. You put the key in the ignition of your car. You don't need to know how the engine works to get the car to drive. When you get on a plane, you may not be able to understand all the laws of lift, thrust, gravity, and drag, but you trust that under the discretion of the pilot, it's going to get you where you need to go. When it comes to your laptop, there are many components running only an engineer can understand, but you still use it. Not knowing how it works doesn't stop you from using it for full benefit.